Our fourth and last speaker for New City Day 2022 is Andrew Camilleri. He is from Malta, an island nation south of Italy. He is an engineer. He'll tell us what kind of engineer he is later. He spent many years in Pakistan and in the center of the Focolare in Rome, working for the Youth for a United World and the Great Zone of Oceania. He studied and specialized in moral theology, which deals with how human beings act in the light of God's revelation. Since 2021, he is co-director with NAR Plaras of the Zone of the Philippines. Please welcome Andrew Camilleri.
I would like to make a comment on this presentation. I don't know why I'm south of Italy and not north of Africa. Anyway, just to say that, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. I feel a little bit humbled, to tell you the truth, to speak right after JR, and also to speak after Hero and Susan, which I like very much, very much. The question that I was asked to present is like this: social media, responsibility, and moral choices. I know that when one speaks about morality, I know Albert will immediately look at his watch to see now how long is this going to be, and this is going to be boring. Anyway, I hope it will be interesting, because I try to fish as much as possible in some leaders of today, and so helped also by Romé and Jose Aranas, and so I'm trying to present a little bit something which might be interesting. I would like to tell you that the talk that I'm going to present is going to be split up, like with a small introduction at the beginning, and then I would like to go into responsibility and moral choices, both on the personal level and also on the collective level. And then I would like to try to find out what attitude we, as a new city body, I would say, which is made up of readers, listeners, viewers, journalists, and who knows what more, what kind of attitude should we be bringing to the social media in order to create a better world? I would say a new culture. This is a word, of course, that I borrow from Chiara, a new culture in this world, which is so much in search. No? So, during the 53rd World Communications Day in 2019, Pope Francis presented social media by saying, "Today's media environment is so pervasive as to be indistinguishable from the sphere of everyday life." I think we can all relate to this, no? Social media are a source of our time, or resource of our time. It is a source of knowledge and basis of relationships. However, many experts also highlight the risks that threaten the search for and sharing of authentic information on a global level. If on one hand, social media represent an extraordinary possibility of access to knowledge, on the other hand, it is also true that it has proven to be one of the areas more exposed to disinformation and to the conscious and targeted distortion of facts and interpersonal relationships, which are often used to discredit. How did Chiara Lubich see the purpose of social media? Going to our roots, we find that our Magna Carta, the spark that started everything off, lies in that heartfelt request of Jesus to the Father shortly before he died. May they all be one. Chiara says that we have been born for this page, for this very verse, I would say, in the gospel, and together with her companions, she asked God how to, that he might make them instruments of unity to reach out to all humanity. This desire to be united has always been the characteristic of each one of us. That's why we are here, no? From the very earliest days, a constant exchange of letters. Chiara used to write something like 20 letters an hour. Can you imagine? She herself says, I don't know how I could manage something like that. And these letters expressed the work of God was carrying out within each one of them. Thanks to this correspondence, this work of God became ever more fruitful as it was shared with others. Now, if we were to take a leap of some 8 decades, today's social media maintain the same purpose. We use them to keep in touch, to update those who were not present for certain events which we think were very important, or to give spiritual support, as JR was saying, to those in difficulty. Let's now broaden our view to see how the world is using social media. We cannot hide the fact that along with the rapid development which makes social media increasingly more useful and fascinating, they also present a series of new and cumbersome problems for society, families, and individuals. Therefore, it is a panorama of lights and shadows. To cite only a few of these problems, there is a leveling of cultures, suffocating the inherent riches in many of these cultures. This is very much felt. Second, ethical relativism, which mixes authoritative messages with others that are superficial and biased. We are all equal on the mass media. There's no authoritative or non-authoritative or superficial. It's all leveled out. Sensationalism at the cost of intruding upon the suffering and privacy of others. We see so much of this. Competitiveness within the productive structures of the communications media, excessive intrusiveness on the public. How can we use the media without being used by the social media? Social media today are, in some cases, dogmatically accepted without an attitude of objective criticism. They are like that, and it's taken as dogmatically. In other cases, they are blamed for immorality, violence, just think of cyberbullying, and superficiality they propose. And in still others, they are overestimated as infallible instruments of power, almost as new idols of a humanity which has lost its certainties. It's interesting to note that we are in a very particular time in the time of humanity. While on one hand, humanity seems to be wandering in the dark after the fall of strong ideologies and blurring of many values, on the other hand, there is a longing for a more united world. And yet, this very moment, we find ourselves equipped, technologically at least, with these powerful means of communications. So I would say with Chiara and so many others, couldn't this be a sign of times, of a united world? Let's hear what St. John Paul II affirms about the social media. He says, they are indeed the new Areopagus, recalling recalling the Acts of the Apostles, where St. Paul spoke in this Areopagus in Athens. They are the new Areopagus of today's world, a great forum which at its best, makes possible the exchange of truthful information, constructive ideas, and sound values, and thus creates community. It is the task of communication to bring people together and enrich their lives. So this would be a little bit an in-depth introduction. Now I would like to pass on to responsibility and moral choices. Definitely, social media are an opportunity to promote encounter with others, as was said earlier, no, by Susan. But they can also increase our self-isolation, like a web that can entrap us. An expert, a group of psychologists, they say like this: young people are the ones most exposed to the illusion that social media can completely satisfy them on a relational level. There is the dangerous phenomenon of young people becoming social hermits who risk alienating themselves completely from society. This dramatic situation has caused serious rupture in the relational fabric of society. You know that there is a very strong disconnection between certain adults and younger generations, even between younger generations themselves of different ages. Social media raise various questions on a collective level, like, for example, ethical, social, juridical, political, economic questions, and challenge us also personally as well. While governments seek legal ways to regulate the social media and to protect original vision of a free, open, and secure network, we all have the possibility and the responsibility to promote a positive use of the social media. Clearly, it is not enough to multiply connections in order to increase mutual understanding. How then can we find the true personal and communitarian identity, aware of the responsibility we have towards one another in the online network as well? First of all, let us seek to understand a little bit more our personal responsibility in the formation of our moral conscience. Each one of us is responsible for his or her own choices. We cannot blame it on others. I'm very sorry to tell you, it's all in us. Choices are all in us. Even to obey others, it's a choice we make. Each one of us, yes. This is because one of the greatest gifts, I would say the greatest would be life, no? But God has also given us another great gift upon creating us, that is freedom. The more our freedom absorbs the grace infused in us by the Holy Spirit, the more it gradually resonates to the point of loving in unison with Christ. However, human freedom is bound by intertwined conditioning factors. They can be psychophysical factors of this dimension, socio-cultural sphere, and even ethical religious aspects relating to the moral customs and religious conditions. If we were to speak in general, every person with lofty ideals in life aims high, and there is no better way to achieve this by living according to our good conscience, which is an echo of God's voice in us. But if we were to look at it as Christians, as many of us are, the formation of a moral conscience is not just a matter of persons doing, but rather a matter of letting oneself be done, or let's say, be shaped by the word of God that dwells in us. St. John, the evangelist, says, "He who does the truth comes towards the light." Therefore, living the gospel is not only a spiritual exercise, but also a formation of the conscience. Maybe you have never thought of it, but this is true. In doing the truth, living the word, one assimilates Jesus' forma mentis, Chiara used to say. That is, Jesus' way of thinking, of reasoning, of evaluating, according to the novelty of the gospel. Also, the comparison of our thoughts with the teachings of the magisterium of the Catholic Church helps our ability to discern better what is good and what is evil, what is to do and what is to avoid. Now, what about the collective spirituality? When I was preparing this presentation, I came across a phrase from Hosea that we read a few weeks ago. Hosea says, he makes this enigmatic statement, "For they sow the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind." Or we can say, they sow the wind, and we will reap a typhoon. You know? This proverb may be compared to the principle of duplication that characterizes social media. While disinformation may be compared to the sowing of the wind, the outcome of disinformation, is a whirlwind that destroys every ripe grain. Here is how Pope Francis expressed himself in an impromptu speech on the 11th General Chapter of the Society of St. Paul, just a few weeks ago. If we consider today's means of communication, cleanliness is missing, honesty is missing, completeness is missing. Disinformation is the order of the day. One thing is said, and now listen carefully, but many others are hidden. Now, as a new city people, we can consider it as a small people, a small group of people with our own culture, which we hope it is new according to the gospel, composed of readers, listeners, viewers, correspondents, journalists, and what have you. What should be our attitude towards social media? How can we contribute to build a better world? And where there is a flow of news, information, and formation, which enlighten, encourage, and give peace. As Christians, our model is Jesus. He was a great communicator, and of him, his contemporaries said, "Never before has anyone spoken like this one." So he was really a great communicator. All the people were hanging on his words. In stark contrast, this same person, Jesus, who had fascinated the crowds, met his death on a cross. Jesus found himself alone, or maybe with sleepless nights, as JR would say, betrayed and ignored. "I do not know this man," says Peter. His most authoritative disciple he was. But not only this, even God the Father, whose every secret he claimed to know, and whose support he had always felt, seems to interrupt all communication with him. This abandonment is certainly the darkest night, the most excruciating agony. And he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" All members of the Focolare find light in their path through the unconditional embrace of Jesus crucified and forsaken, that life presents in its challenges and sufferings. And if you allow me, even some postmodern philosophers, if you were to read between the lines, they refer to Jesus forsaken. But you have to go deeper in what they are saying. I'm speaking of the woes of the 20th century and the newer ones of this century. Our new city journalists from different parts of the world, we had Susan on Zoom earlier, have been working along these lines for these past decades. They have attempted to offer some guidelines concerning communications. Though their experiences, we know very well, are limited, however, their coherence to living these high ideals sows a seed destined to yield to the slow growth of a new culture. Here are 4 considerations that were mentioned earlier by Susan, but please take them from my point of view, which is more on responsibility and moral choices. She said, which is quoting also this Net One meeting with Chiara, communicating is essential, very essential. In seeking to live the basic law of loving others and as one loves oneself, we are led to share about the steps involved and the consequent fruits. It's important that we share these moments. Through this sharing, a light is lit in the one who listens and in the one who expresses. And the experience seems to be fixed in eternity, whereas what is not communicated is completely lost. It's a grace lost. Another consideration which is so important, and sometimes we overlook because we take it for granted, is to put ourselves in the shoes of the others. Chiara would say, make yourselves one. It is important to know something about the person or the audience we are addressing, their needs, desires, problems. Likewise, we wish to share who we are, like JR just did, and to explain our motivations in order to create certain reciprocity. In this way, the message is not only understood intellectually, but also it is shared heart to heart. One thing that we have also learned from Chiara over the years is to emphasize the positive. So many have questioned this point. I'll explain a little bit better. Expressing the positive has always been our style of communication. We are convinced that it is infinitely more constructive to highlight the positive perspectives without stopping at the negative aspects. And this is what New City tries to do all over the world. Note, however, it is opportune to report errors, limits and faults to whoever is in a position of responsibility. So we are not hiding anything, but it is important to emphasize the positive. As Susan was saying earlier, it is important, the person. Let us all, as New City body, if I may use this expression, take courage to go ahead, even if we have many challenges in front of us. But God is calling us to this mission, and also it is a vocation to communicate. The unity that we try to build day by day among us will help us to strengthen our communications. So it is good to share what we want to communicate with others before posting it, if possible. What is important, however, is to have this common determination to use the social media for what they must be, instruments for achieving a more united world. Thank you for listening, as Hiro or the others were saying earlier.